Namaskar.
Namaskar.
My name is Shruti Dhiora, and I'm the co-host of this podcast by Radio Eka. In this final episode of the COVID Wellbeing series, today we'll talk about healing from grief and trauma. Today we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Bill Mahony, who is a professor of religious studies at Davidson College, North Carolina, United States. Bill has a deep understanding of yogic life, grounded in 5 decades of his own spiritual practice. He travels nationally and internationally to lead retreats and workshops on yoga philosophy and practice, and has written numerous books and articles on the spiritual traditions of India, including The Artful Universe, An Introduction to the Vedic Religious Imagination, and Exquisite Love, Reflections on the Spiritual Life based on Narad's Bhakti Sutra. A hearty welcome, Bill, and thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Shruti. And warm greetings to you and warm greetings to all of our listeners. It's good to be here. Thank you.
Great. So Bill, as parts of the world are slowly coming out of COVID, we are thinking about how to get some closure, really, to move on. Millions of people have lost a loved one or have suffered over the last year. And this has happened across the world, starting with Europe, US, and now more recently, the deadly second wave in India. So we'd like to talk about how, as an individual and a family, or as a society, we can heal from this collective trauma. How do you suggest people should heal from deep grief that they have experienced?
Perhaps we could begin by thinking, rather than recover from grief, we can think of recover from within grief. And the reason I say that is that grief is a form of love, and we would not grieve if we did not love, and love is always a good thing. And so when we grieve, we are, of course, remembering a cherished one, and longing for missing the cherished one or ones, and this is a fundamentally important part of being human. So one thing I'd say, and perhaps I'd come back to it a little bit later, is that I think one way to recover within grief is to practice a yogic virtue of what's known as satya, truthfulness. And it's usually translated as truthfulness, but I would like to suggest that that yogic virtue is one of being real, of being authentic. And grief is real. It is an authentic and true and deep and very important, valuable human expression of the heart, and particularly of the heart that is sad and longing. Hrid shoka, it's known as the heartache is part of being human, and so I think part of it, as I said, is to be true to that. To be authentic, not to repress or to suppress one's feelings of grief, but rather to experience them and to be true to them. I think also one way that we, as human beings, can work with grief is to in some way connect with what we regard to be sacred in some way. People will have different ideas and definitions of what is sacred, but I think in some way to connect with what is sacred, both inwardly and outwardly, so that, for example, one connection with the sacred would be to pray, to pray for the departed ones, to pray for the community, to pray for one's family, to pray for oneself. The power of that wish and hope and intention and remembrance can be very healing in a kind of focused way. Outwardly, we can perform rituals. The Indian tradition is very rich with ritual. And rituals are very important because they allow us to express inward feelings and states and emotions outwardly, and to share them with others, and to make the connection with others and with family. So we can perform important rituals as well. I wish that our various cultures would have more opportunities for public rituals. And what I mean by that is the larger culture getting together to acknowledge the loss of loved ones. And I'm not sure how to do that, but in some way, to, as a community, remember our loved ones. I think one way to help recover from within traumas of all sorts and grief is to, particularly grief, is to send best wishes, and to send best wishes not only to the departed one or to those who are suffering today, in the world, but to send best wishes to the world itself. And I'm reminded here of the Shanti Pattas. You know these, the verses of peace. Sometimes prayers end with the repetition of the word Shanti 3 times. Shanti, 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 peace, peace, peace. And I've thought about that, and I wonder, why 3 times? And I find that in the yoga tradition, some of the commentaries on the yoga tradition, classical commentaries, describe the universe itself as consisting of 3 kind of components. There's what's known as the Adhidevika realm, the Adhibhataka realm, and the Adhyatmika realm. You're aware of this, okay? So that the Adhidevika realm is the realm that seems to be, well, the physical world to be one thing, but also the world that seems to be beyond our comprehension. It's hard to really understand how it works. Mysterious world in a way. And I think this could be let me just say, in each one of these 3 worlds, well, let me continue. The Adhibhataka world is the world of society, the world of creatures, of fellow beings. And then the Adhyatmika realm is the inner world, all right? Now, the yoga tradition holds that each one of these worlds has its beauties and its splendors and its mysteries, and each one of these worlds has the possibility of dukkha, of sorrow and suffering. So I think of the Adhidevika realm as a realm perhaps of catastrophes, perhaps, floods and volcanoes and forest fires and that sort of thing, and also perhaps viruses, pandemics. Okay. I think of the Adhibhataka realm as the realm of human community, of society, and the sorrow that people kind of inflict on each other through one group oppressing another and that sort of thing. And then the Adhyatmika level, the inner level, is the fear and the anxiety and sadness and grief that we experience inwardly. And so when we say Shanti 3 times, perhaps we're saying, may there be peace in all 3 worlds. And I think as we pray for peace in all 3 worlds, that itself can be a form of inward and outward healing.
That's beautiful. And in fact, it's interesting that you bring up the Shanti part. That was really my favorite mantra growing up, and even still today. I think it's just beautiful. It really, to pray for the peace around you and for the universe. I think it's a beautiful thought. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now let's move on again to a little bit on the yoga side. So we have often heard samatvam yoga uchyate. So that's equanimity is yoga.
Mhm.
So would you please talk to us about how yogic practices help us achieve equanimity in times like these? So do the Yoga Sutras make this connection from asana or meditation practice to our capacity for dealing with trauma and grief?
Um, the, the, the short answer is not explicitly. If you go to the Yoga Sutras, it does not mention grief specifically, right? But it does
Okay.
mention dukkha and ways to deal, and what is dukkha, suffering and sorrow. But if I could come back to that in just a minute, the phrase samatvam yoga uchyate, yoga is equanimity, or equanimity is yoga, it comes from the Bhagavad Gita. That's its source. And I'm sure you know that. And the context of that phrase is equanimity is described as a state of an inner state in which one performs one's actions in the world and performs one's responsibilities in engagement with the world responsibly, because it's the right thing to do without a personal attachment to the end of it. It's the renunciation of the fruits of the action. That is said to bring an inner equanimity. Samatvam yoga uchyate. Okay. Now to your question about the Yoga Sutras specifically. Okay. As I said, it does. The Yoga Sutras do not mention grief, but they do mention dukkha and sorrow. And they are oriented toward, and the entire text is oriented toward the calming of the repetitive disturbances of the mind, which we can think of as a kind of grief, or grief is a mind that is not calm. And you say, and I'm not judging it, I'm just kind of describing it, right?
No, many times our thoughts are a source of grief.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And so the Yoga Sutras say, well, this grief or any other vritti, the Sanskrit word here is vritti, that's the turning of the mind, as it were, is attained or gained through practices, through yoga. And in fact, the Yoga Sutra defines yoga itself. The yoga's chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is the calming of these fluctuations of the mind. And then the whole text itself is oriented toward, well, how do you do that? And one of the sutras, out of 194 of them, says dhyana heyastadvrittaya, which means meditation. Meditation is one way to calm the pain and sorrow of grief. And another one says vishoka vajyotismati, which means this calm, clear mind can be attained by attending to an inner light that is free of sorrow. So there is a remembrance of the possibility of acceptance, of letting go, without forgetting. Remember, I want to stress, we do not forget, but we practice what's known as aparigraha. There's a kind of letting go, a kind of not clinging, and by not clinging, one is free from grasping, and the freedom from grasping brings a kind of healing, kind of a calmness, right?
Got it. That's beautiful. So while talking a little bit more about healing, how does healing manifest physiologically? So what happens, let's say, in our physical and emotional bodies when we undergo trauma or grief, and then later when we come out of it?
One way to think about this, out of many, many possibilities, the relationship between body and emotion, body and spirit. One way to think about this comes from the Vedantic tradition of yoga, Goes back as early as the Upanishads, these texts. For example, the Taittiriya Upanishad, in speaking about embodiment, what is it to be in a body, identifies 5 components of one's embodiment. And let me just mention those very briefly. At the very center, the very core of each of our being, the very heart of our being, is said to be an unconditional joy, a joy that seeks to express itself. It's known as ananda. I like to go like this, because this joy likes to express itself. And as this ananda expresses itself, it becomes increasingly manifest or increasingly solid, if you will, increasingly embodied. So as it expands, it becomes first, and it takes the form of an inherent wisdom. It's known as vijnana. Each one of us within us has an inherent wisdom. And as the ananda spreads through this layer of vijnana, of wisdom, it then takes the form of our thoughts and concepts and preconceptions. It takes the form of our judgments and our prejudgments, our prejudices and our emotions. It solidifies into various ways of thinking, all right? And then as this ananda continues to spread, it takes the form of what's known as prana, this word of breath, of energy, life energy. And then as it continues to form, it then it solidifies in what's known as the Annamaya Purusha, the person made of food, which is a reference to the physical body, right? So if you can picture that, our embodiment consists of physical body, breath, emotions and thought, wisdom and joy, right? Now, trauma, before I say that, each one of these 5 layers can serve as either a gateway for ananda to spread or as a barrier to ananda. Okay, either way. Trauma, all kinds of trauma, is a barrier. It stops the expansion of ananda. Right. So when the physical body is injured, there's a trauma there, and it blocks the ananda. And as we know, we feel pain and sorrow and unhappiness. Okay. And that physical body is pervaded by the pranamaya purusha, the person made of breath. So it affects the way we breathe, and the way we breathe, and then that affects our kind of living energy, and then that affects our state of mind. You see, they're all kind of within each other.
All interconnected, yes.
All interconnected, yeah. Interconnectivity is very important. And that, and then the mind that is injured, if you will, and sometimes the yoga world talks about samskara, which is a kind of an imprint on the mind that comes from trauma, trauma, to use other words, that can even affect our vijnana, our understanding, and we see ourselves in the world in a way that is conditioned by the trauma. And when that happens, then the ananda is very difficult for it to shine through. Okay, so yoga, I mean, here's kind of the way I would almost describe yoga itself. Yoga is the aligning of all 5 of those bodies. The physical body with the breath with the mind and the emotions, the mind with inherent wisdom, and wisdom with an inherent joy. Yoga is the aligning of all of those so that ananda can spread. Otherwise, it gets stuck, right? And asana, of course, is a physical practice. You see, it's the use of the physical body. Pranayama is the use of the breath. Do you see that? And then the various virtues of ahimsa, aparigraha, of not wishing harm, of not clinging, of truthfulness, all that. These are ways to deal with the mind body. you see, so that
Mm-hmm.
it can be clear of these traumas and therefore let ananda spread.
That's beautiful.
Okay.
It's every time I hear a new concept in yoga, it amazes me how it's very simple, but it all comes together in a very profound way.
Isn't
So
it
that's
amazing?
what it is, really mind-boggling. That's wonderful. Thank you.
There is so
Um,
much there. There's so much there. So much.
it's a lifetime of study. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so the thing is that people in India tend to surrender, the timing of death to
Mm,
something called fate or destiny, or
mm,
sometimes just on account of their accumulated karmas.
mhm,
But in a pandemic where millions of people seem to be untimely affected,
mm.
I feel that these, notions are conventional notions break down. So, how should people reconcile with this grim reality that has unfolded over the last many months?
Another key question, I mean, just fundamentally important question. And I agree with you. I think that traditional understandings of karma and the moment of death and well, karma in general, um, they and I can't remember exactly how you said it, but they fall a little bit short, don't they? They don't quite explain. They don't. It it's hard to fit in current experience with traditional philosophy. So one possibility is just don't try. I mean that the events are powerfully incomprehensible in some ways, and part of the grieving process is to be true to that, to acknowledge that. That's satya again. Now that said, one more point. I myself find it a little bit difficult to say that everybody who suffers from the disease has the same karma. You see, and to me,
Yeah.
that's a little bit difficult to. Okay, but that said, I don't think that's true to the Indian tradition. I think the Indian tradition, particularly the yogic tradition, tends to stress individual karma rather than group karma. So we might just note that. And knowing that, perhaps we can extrapolate into how we might think of as a kind of a group experience, right? So the Indian tradition recognizes different types of karma. One is known as sanchitta karma, one is known as prarabdha karma, and one is known as agami karma. Technical words, if your listeners are not familiar with them, I'll translate these. The sanchitta karma is the vast, almost immeasurable pool of all past experiences all over the world, everything. Everything. I mean, if you think about the history of the universe, there's been a lot of activity that is behind this present moment, that has led up to
Mhm.
this present moment. You see, and that's sanchitta karma, right? And I think we could extrapolate. We could say that all of us are experiencing sanchitta karma because we are all living in the world, and because we are all living in the world, we all share an immensely long history, complicated, starting with the Big Bang, if you will. Okay, now a second form of karma is known as prarabdha karma, which is the way that sanchitta karma, that vast pool of past actions, has influenced this life now. And again, the Indian tradition tends to focus on individual life rather than communal life, right?
Right.
But out of all of that vast life, what is it that has led to your experience right in this life? And what is it that has led to my experience right in this life? Okay, that's prarabdha karma, right? And I think maybe behind your question and between the lines of the question is, are we are we kind of confusing prarabdha karma with sanchitta karma? And confusing isn't quite the right word, but I would encourage people to think of the prarabdha karma as their lives, their particular lives, and unique and valuable and inherently worthy lives, each individual life, okay? And that this prarabdha karma, the living at this moment in time, with all that's going on in the world, with all of the interactions of communities and animals and all of that, that's sanchitta karma. You say so that individual people have this prarabdha karma that draws on the same sanchitta karma, and that's what makes it look like we're all each one of our karmas is the same. You see, when it's not. Okay, maybe that's a long way of saying I would encourage each of us to remember the uniqueness of each person, and to remember the uniqueness, particularly of those we grieve, that their life was their life, and not to kind of say, well, it was part of this immense impersonal pandemic. You see, to mourn their death, and to honor it. Okay. Now, a third type of karma, and I would hold to be very, very important and relevant here, is the agami karma, which means the karma that is being established in our actions right now. What we are doing now will have an effect in the future. This law of cause and effect, that's what karma is. What we do now is helping determine the future. Okay, so we can respond to the situation. We can respond to the pandemic. We can respond to all of the dukkha in the world, and we can respond to it in ways that bring less dukkha, that soothe the herd shoka, the grief of the heart, the sadness of the heart. You see, we can all dedicate ourselves to being in the world in a way that brings less suffering. That would be agami karma. You see?
That's great. I think each one of us needs to find our own path of service and our own ways of serving this world.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay, moving on to living in the present moment. So with this pandemic, we have come face to face with the fragility of our life, in a way that we really don't think about or do not encounter in our daily lives. So we have heard about the value of living in the moment. This pandemic seems to have really make us realize that truth like never before. So what practices would you recommend to our listeners so that they can make living in the present moment a natural way of life?
Good question again. And the first thing that comes to my mind, the first response that comes to my mind is return to the breath. I find that the awareness of the breath is the most immediate access to the present moment. And it is poignant because those who have suffered from this particular virus have often been affected by the breath. So we need to remember that and be attentive to that. But we ourselves, those who are not suffering from the virus, can cultivate an awareness of the breath, and here we can do so according to classical, traditional kind of pranayama techniques that we get from the Yoga Sutra, that tend to be techniques of holding the breath and stopping the breath, and that Patanjali talks about it in that way. I would encourage us and your listeners, I mean, if you ask me, okay, to think of it in another way, to be mindful of the breath in the sense of to be mindful of the movements of the breath, to be mindful of the actual movements of the inhalation and the exhalation, to hold the mind in the breath and to notice the movement, and then and to notice the living energy and the refreshment that the breath brings, the way the breath refreshes the body and cleanses the body, to be aware of that. You say that's a way of being right here in the moment. As one is attending to the breath, one also realizes that all living beings breathe, and so that as we breathe, we bring in clouds and air and we bring in the universe, you see, and then as we exhale, we share ourselves with it, so we can be attentive to that dynamic flow of receiving and giving and being part of the universe. As you said earlier, everything's connected and interconnected. So attention to the breath is one way to be right here in this moment, right? And then as we cultivate and refine and deepen our awareness of the breath, we can cultivate awareness of the body, the whole body, and what is happening in the body. What are sensations? What is posture? What is movement of the body? And what are its comforts and discomforts? You see, as one becomes aware of the body the way one is aware of the breath, then one is living right in this moment, right now. The more one does that, the more one is in the moment. And then as we cultivate awareness of the breath and the body, we can also cultivate a similar awareness of our relationships with others. And what is happening right now in our relationship with others and with the world. And so it's a question of mindfulness, of cultivating, deepening, refining, clarifying mindfulness itself. I think it's a fundamentally helpful practice.
I think you put it very beautifully. Actually, my personal experience has also been that the moment you start with yourself, going through asana and meditation practice and bringing awareness to your breath and your body, your relationships and your other actions automatically transform,
yes.
Right? I think that shift emanates from within, and then, it emanates outside. So
yes.
I think that really helps.
And it gets back to your point about your interconnectivity. All things are connected. Yeah, good.
Right.
And a very yogic teaching is, you start here. You start with yourself and start with your breath and your body and your mind, and then it extends to the world. Yeah.
Yes, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. So I think we're almost towards the end of our conversation, but before we let you go, I just have one quick last question. Do you have any parting message for families who have lost their loved ones in the pandemic? Our hearts go out to all the families where, parents have lost their children or kids have lost their parents. So any parting message for them?
We remember them. We hold them. We hold all of you in our hearts. Yes. And again, I think I've heard Shoka, the sorrow of the heart, and I shared heard Shoka, the sorrow of the heart with each of all of you. And I remember a verse from the Bhagavad Gita that your listeners may well know. It means a lot to me. I find it very supportive. And it would sound somewhat like this. Okay. Nainam chindanti shastrani, nainam dahati pavakaha, na chainam kleda yantyapoho, na shoshata yimarata. I'm sorry, I stumbled there a little bit, but we can translate this as, this is in reference to the true self, to the self that does not perish with dehanta, with the end of the body. Right? the true self, the self that we love, the self that we remember, and the self that we cherish. The Bhagavad Gita says, swords cannot pierce it, nor fire burn it. Water cannot wet it, nor the winds wither it. It's a beautiful line, I think. And as I hear that and want to share it with those who are in sorrow, may you remember that the love you share with your departed loved one is eternal and does not go away. And may you be nourished by that love, knowing that you too are similarly loved.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Yes. That is definitely one of my favorite shlokas from Bhagavad Gita as well. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah, so I think thank you again so much, Bill, for your time. Really appreciate your time and your wisdom. And we hope that our conversation today will help our listeners come out of the grief or trauma they might have experienced. And we really hope this world can heal soon. Om Shanti, Shanti.
Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shruti.